He said my dreams were childish. He laughed when I told him I'd make it on my own. Back then, I believed his words, until I realized they were just fear wearing confidence as a mask. Every insult, every smirk, I remembered them all. Not to hate him, but to remind myself what doubt looks like. And when the tables turned, when the laughter stopped, he didn't even recognize the person I had become. But I remembered every word. Because success doesn't shout, it simply stands there, smiling. But before I continue, make sure you're subscribed to the Revenge by Sophia channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. The room was small, filled with the faint hum of a broken ceiling fan and the smell of old paper. She sat by the window, her notebook open, writing words that felt bigger than the world she lived in. Outside, the city glowed with the kind of life she longed for: bright lights, rushing cars, people who mattered. But here she was, just another invisible face dreaming out loud. "I'm going to build something," she whispered to herself. "Something that lasts." Her voice trembled, but her eyes, they burned with quiet fire. The pen in her hand felt like a weapon against her smallness. Yet, behind her, a soft laugh cut through the moment, low, mocking, familiar. It was him. And with that sound, her dreams suddenly felt fragile. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a half-smile curling on his lips. "You? Build something? You can barely hold on to that job you hate." His voice was sharp, laced with amusement, but underneath it, something colder. She looked up at him, clutching her notebook like it was the last piece of herself she could protect. "Maybe I'll fail," she said softly, "but at least I'll try." He laughed harder, walking closer until his shadow fell across her face. "You've got too many dreams and not enough talent," he said, almost gently. "People like us don't get out of places like this." The air grew heavy, and for a second, her chest felt hollow. His words echoed, not because she believed them, but because part of her feared he might be right. Still, she met his gaze and whispered, "Then watch me." He smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Oh, I will." And in that moment, a silent war began, one neither of them could yet see the end of. That night, she couldn't sleep. His words circled her mind like vultures, picking at every ounce of confidence she had left. The notebook sat open on her table, half-written pages glowing faintly under the dim lamp. Her dreams looked smaller now, childish even, but something inside her refused to let go. She walked to the mirror and stared at her reflection. The same tired eyes, the same scars of disappointment. But tonight, there was something different, a spark of anger, cold and clean. One day, she whispered to her reflection, "You'll regret laughing." The city outside whispered too, car horns rain, a lonely dog barking somewhere far away. The world didn't care about her dream. But maybe that was the point. Maybe she'd have to make it care. And as she blew out the light, one thought stayed with her. What if he was wrong? Days turned into weeks, and reality began to bite. Every job interview ended with polite smiles and empty promises. Every attempt to move forward somehow dragged her deeper into the mud. She'd sit in her narrow kitchen, staring at her cracked phone screen, scrolling through other people's success, while her own inbox stayed empty. Her friends stopped asking how she was doing. Her family stopped pretending to understand. Only he remained nearby, always ready with a smirk and a cruel reminder. "Still chasing that fantasy?" he'd ask, almost enjoying her exhaustion. Each time, she forced a smile. But inside, her confidence was bleeding out. She started to wonder if maybe the world was right. Maybe dreams were meant for other people. That night, she tore a page from her notebook and stared at the blank space. "How do I keep believing?" she wrote, but her hand wouldn't finish the question. Because even she didn't know the answer anymore. The rain didn't stop for days. It tapped on her window like a warning, soft and relentless. Her small room grew darker, colder, and quieter. She hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days. The world outside moved on, but she stayed frozen, caught between who she wanted to be and who she was forced to become. Her dreams used to sing in her mind. Now they whispered faintly, almost afraid to be heard. Every corner of the room seemed to echo his laughter, his words. People like us don't get out. She tried to work, to focus, to breathe, but even her thoughts betrayed her. Failure had a sound now, the slow drip of a leaking faucet, the hum of an old refrigerator, the silence of a phone that never rang. One night, she slammed her notebook shut and whispered, maybe he was right. But the moment she said it, something deep inside her, something small and fierce, screamed no. The next morning, she stood by the window, watching sunlight crawl back into the room. It painted the walls gold for the first time in weeks. She took a deep breath, and for the first time it didn't hurt. Maybe failure wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning of the story no one told. She walked to her desk, opened her notebook again, and began to write. The pages filled slowly, not with perfect ideas, but with honest ones. Her fear, her anger, her determination, all poured out like ink that refused to dry. And then, halfway through a sentence, she stopped and smiled. I don't need anyone's permission to try again. Her voice was steady now, her heart heavy but alive. She didn't know how she would make it, only that she would. Outside, the rain had stopped. The silence that once suffocated her now felt different, calm, waiting. But somewhere deep down, she knew, storms always return before the sun. The city didn't notice her return. Why would it? She was just another face lost in the blur of morning crowds and cold gray skies. Her days began before sunrise, when the world was still half asleep and the streets were quiet enough to hear her own heartbeat. She found a small desk job to survive, one that barely paid the bills, but left her nights free for her dream. At night, the world belonged to her. The hum of her old laptop became a song, her notes scattered across the desk like broken wings. She studied, wrote, built, and failed, over and over again. Some nights she cried quietly, whispering, just one reason to keep going. But then she'd remember his words, people like us don't get out. And she'd wipe her tears and keep typing, whispering, watch me. The nights were long, but something was changing. Her pain was turning into purpose. The world doesn't open its doors easily. She learned that fast. Every email she sent felt like a message in a bottle, tossed into a sea of indifference. Rejections arrived one after another, short and polite. We've decided to move in another direction. At first, each one hit her like a bruise. Then, she started saving them, printing them out, pinning them on the wall like trophies of survival. The wall grew crowded, paper edges curling, words blurring. But every rejection was proof she was trying. Proof she was alive. People around her started to notice her exhaustion. Why don't you just stop? Someone asked at work. You're only hurting yourself. She smiled faintly and replied, pain means I'm still fighting. That night, as thunder cracked above the city, she made herself a promise to stop seeking approval and start creating something so real that no one could laugh at it again. The storm raged outside, and for the first time, she didn't hide from it. Weeks became months. Sleep turned into a luxury. But her notebook grew thicker, her work sharper. The once scattered ideas began to form a shape, something that could actually stand. One evening, as she uploaded her latest project, her hands trembled. She didn't expect miracles anymore, just a sign that she wasn't invisible. The next morning, her inbox blinked with a single notification. A message. A real one. It read, we'd like to discuss your work. It's impressive. For a long time, she just stared at it, her heart pounding like thunder trapped in her chest. The world outside was waking up, but for her, it felt like it was beginning. She smiled, not wide, not triumphant, but small, quiet, powerful. Because sometimes, the smallest flame burns the brightest in the dark. The sun rose differently that morning. Golden light slipped through her curtains and rested softly on her desk, on the notebook that had witnessed every tear, every failed idea, every stubborn breath she refused to give up. The email was still open on her laptop. She read it again and again, her fingers trembling, afraid it might vanish if she blinked too long. It wasn't fame. It wasn't money. But it was a door. Someone had seen her, truly seen her, through the noise. When she arrived at the small meeting room that afternoon, her heart beat like a drum. The air smelled of coffee and fresh ink. The people there spoke in calm tones, but she felt the weight of something monumental. "We think your concept has potential," one of them said. "Let's work together." For a moment, she couldn't speak. After years of silence, she finally heard the sound of her own worth. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Weeks turned into a blur of work, energy, and cautious excitement. Her days grew longer, her nights shorter. She worked with people who respected her voice, who asked for her ideas instead of mocking them. Slowly, she built something, a brand, a vision, a life, piece by piece. Every success was a whisper to the past, "See me now." She didn't post much online. She didn't boast. She preferred silence, the kind that glows with quiet power. Her project launched, and within days, messages started pouring in, strangers thanking her, praising her, sharing her work across platforms she never dreamed of reaching. Her inbox no longer mocked her. The city that once ignored her now carried her name on its billboards, its whispers, its screens. But somewhere, in the crowd of millions, she wondered, was he watching? It happened on a Thursday, ordinary, bright, unremarkable. She was walking through a cafe near her new office, taking a rare breath of peace, when she heard a familiar laugh. Soft. Confident. His. Time seemed to freeze. She turned slowly, her pulse quickening. There he was, sitting at a corner table, head lowered over his phone. Same smirk. Same careless charm. But something was different now. He looked smaller. She watched him quietly, her coffee cooling in her hands. He hadn't seen her yet, and for a brief moment, she thought of walking away, of keeping her victory a secret. But curiosity held her still. After all these years, why did the sound of his voice still make her heart ache? Not from love, but from memory? The question lingered as she stepped closer, soft, deliberate, unstoppable. He looked the same, but the air around him had changed. The man who once carried laughter like a weapon now spoke in half-sentences, eyes darting around like a hunted animal. His phone never stopped buzzing, but the messages were not kind. Missed payments. Lost clients. Broken promises. She watched from a distance in that cafe unseen. The way his hands trembled when he thought no one was looking. The way he checked his reflection in the window, as if searching for the person he used to be. The years had not been kind to him. He had climbed fast, burning bridges to light his way, but flames eventually die. When he finally left the cafe, she noticed, his clothes were worn, his smile brittle. And as he disappeared into the crowded street, she wondered if life had finally started whispering back the same words he once told her. People like us don't get out. Rumors travel faster than truth. Within months, his name began to fade from the circles that once praised him. His company, the one he'd built on pride and pretense, started crumbling. His partners left, his investors pulled out, and his charm no longer worked like it used to. He grew desperate. Friends stopped answering his calls. The nights became his enemies, long, sleepless hours haunted by what-ifs and regrets. He would look in the mirror and whisper to himself, "It's just a bad season." But seasons change, and this one never did. Somewhere in the city, her name was rising while his was falling, like two stars moving in opposite directions. He didn't know yet, but fate was slowly weaving the thread that would tie them back together. And when that day came, it wouldn't be by chance. It would be by consequence. One evening, rain poured over the city, like it was washing away sins. He sat in a dim bar, shoulders hunched, his reflection rippling in his half-empty glass. Around him, laughter and life filled the air, but not for him. He was alone, a ghost in his own story. He pulled out his phone and scrolled aimlessly. For a second, his thumb froze. Her face flashed on the screen. A post. A headline. Her name attached to success. To admiration. To everything he once mocked. His chest tightened. He turned off the phone, but it was too late. The ghosts of his past had found him again. He leaned back, whispering to the empty room. She actually did it. The bartender glanced at him, puzzled, but he didn't speak again. Because deep down, he knew the tables had turned. And somewhere out there, she was watching. The invitation came unexpectedly. A collaboration request from a company struggling to rebuild, the very company he once owned. She almost laughed when she saw the name on the email. It felt like fate was playing a cruel joke, or perhaps a beautiful one. For a long time, she stared at the message, fingers frozen above the keyboard. A part of her wanted to decline, to keep her peace untouched. But curiosity whispered louder than mercy. She accepted. The following week, she entered the glass building that once rejected her years ago. Everything looked polished and new, but the air smelled the same, of ambition, fear, and lies. And as she stepped into the boardroom, her eyes found him. Older, tired, but unmistakably him. He didn't look up at first. But when he did, the world seemed to stop breathing. Their eyes met across the table. No words, no smiles. Just silence heavy enough to cut through glass. His lips parted slightly, like he'd seen a ghost. For years, he'd imagined her gone, forgotten, faded into the corners of failure. But there she was, calm, confident, untouchable. He rose slowly, stammering, You're the new consultant?" She nodded, voice steady. "Yes. I'll be overseeing your recovery plan." A faint tremor crossed his face, pride wrestling with humiliation. "You've come far," he managed. She smiled softly. "I had good motivation." The others in the room glanced between them, sensing tension they couldn't name. The air felt electric, two histories colliding under polite words. For the rest of the meeting, he couldn't look her in the eye. And she didn't need him to, because the silence between them said everything words never could. After the meeting, she found herself standing alone by the window, watching the city lights shimmer like 1,000 restless souls. Behind her, footsteps echoed. His voice came, softer now. "I owe you an apology," he said. She turned, meeting his gaze. "For what?" "For not believing in you," he whispered. "For laughing." The honesty in his tone surprised her. For a brief second, she almost pitied him. Almost. But pity was not what she'd worked for. "You don't owe me anything," she said quietly. "You already gave me what I needed." He frowned, confused. "And what was that?" She smiled faintly. "A reason." Then she walked away, leaving him alone in that glass room, his reflection following her retreating figure. And for the first time, he realized what true defeat looked like, silent, graceful, and standing in the light. He couldn't sleep that night. Her face haunted every thought, every breath. The same woman he once laughed at now sat across from him in power, calm, polished, and utterly unreachable. He tried to tell himself it was coincidence, that success had just been kind to her. But deep down, he knew better. He poured himself a drink and sat in darkness. The city lights flickered through his window, reflecting in his half-empty glass. He remembered the nights they once talked, when she'd shared her wild dreams and he'd crushed them with his words. He'd thought he was protecting her from disappointment. In truth, he'd only protected himself from seeing her strength. He leaned back and whispered into the silence. She did it. The words trembled as they left his lips. And for the first time, he realized maybe this was how karma smiled. Quietly. Days later, she visited the company again, this time with authority. The office buzzed as she entered. Even those who didn't know her could feel the shift in the air. She carried herself with the quiet poise of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. He stood waiting in the hallway, unsure whether to greet her or hide. She walked past him, offering a polite nod, nothing more. That single gesture cut deeper than any insult ever could. Later, during a review session, one of his junior staff asked her a question about leadership. She smiled and said, "True leadership means remembering how people made you feel when you were small and choosing to never be like them." Her gaze drifted toward him, brief, sharp, knowing. He lowered his eyes, unable to speak. The room was silent, because everyone could feel what he had lost and what she had become. As her work with the company drew to an end, she received a message. "Can we talk? Just once." She hesitated before agreeing. They met in a quiet cafe, the same kind of place where their story had begun. He arrived early, dressed neatly, but worn down by time. She noticed how his confidence now looked like armor cracked at the edges. He spoke first, his voice low. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd like to start again. Maybe work for you, if there's ever a place." She looked at him for a long moment. The past replayed in her mind, his laughter, her tears, her nights alone. But what she felt now wasn't anger. It was peace. "Maybe there's room," she said softly. "But not under me, beside me. If you've learned what humility means." He nodded, eyes glistening with something between shame and gratitude. And as she left, he realized he didn't just live in her shadow anymore. He was learning to stand within it. Weeks passed quietly. The company was recovering, slowly but steadily, much because of her work. He kept his distance, speaking to her only when necessary, his once booming voice now careful and respectful. She noticed the change, but never mentioned it. The silence between them was no longer bitter, just heavy with the ghosts of what once was. One evening, she stayed late at the office. Through the glass walls, she saw him sitting alone. The same man who once filled rooms with arrogance, now bent over his desk in silence. For a moment, she wondered if this was what justice looked like. Not loud, not cruel, but quietly humbling. She walked over and placed a file beside him. "You've done good work," she said simply. He looked up, startled. "You still believe that?" "I never stopped," she replied, her voice calm. Then she walked away, leaving him staring after her, unsure whether to thank her or apologize again. The next day, he approached her in the parking lot. The sky was gray, clouds heavy with rain. "Why are you kind to me?" he asked quietly. "After everything?" She smiled faintly. "Because I learned something from you." He looked confused. "From me?" "Yes," she said. "You taught me that cruelty only creates more of itself. But grace breaks the cycle." He lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. "I destroyed what we had." "You did," she said softly. "But that's the thing about destruction. It clears the ground for something new." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind stirred the air, carrying the scent of coming rain. And then she said, "You can't undo the past, but you can honor it by never repeating it." He nodded slowly, words caught in his throat. And just like that, the war between them ended, not with victory but understanding. In the weeks that followed, something strange happened. The tension in the office began to ease. People smiled more, trusted more. He started working harder, quieter, rebuilding his reputation piece by piece. She watched from a distance, not with pride, but with quiet relief. One afternoon, during a presentation, he spoke of teamwork, resilience, and humility. And when he finished, he glanced at her, a silent acknowledgement. She gave a small nod, the kind that says we made it through. Later that evening, as she stood outside, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the glass towers gold. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the weight of years lift from her shoulders. Revenge had brought her power, but grace had brought her peace. And peace was what he could never give, because she had to find it herself. Time didn't move quickly. It drifted. Days melted into months, months into years, and the echoes of the past softened like distant thunder. She had built something beautiful, something lasting. Her company grew beyond her wildest dreams. Her name carried respect wherever it was spoken. Yet, success no longer thrilled her. It humbled her. In her office, she sometimes caught herself staring at her reflection, the confident woman in tailored clothes, eyes older, wiser, but still carrying that same spark that began in a small, dimly lit room years ago. Some nights, she'd open her old notebook, the one filled with faded ink and shaky handwriting. The pages smelled like history. The words inside still trembled with the voice of the girl who refused to quit. And sometimes, she'd whisper to the memory of that girl, "You made it, and you did it your way." As for him, he changed, too. He no longer chased attention or praise. The world that once celebrated his arrogance had long forgotten his name, but he didn't mind anymore. He had learned to live quietly, to build slowly, to speak with respect. Every now and then, he'd see her name in the news, award ceremonies, interviews, features. Instead of jealousy, he felt something strange and steady, pride. The kind that comes from finally understanding what greatness looks like when it's earned. He kept her words close. Grace breaks the cycle. And whenever he mentored young dreamers now, he warned them gently. Never mock someone's fire. You never know if it's the light that'll save you one day. He'd smile softly after saying it, the ghost of regret fading just a little more each time. Years later, fate crossed their paths once again. Not as rivals, not as strangers, but as equals. It was at a charity event. She was speaking on stage about perseverance and second chances. He sat quietly in the audience, listening. When the speech ended, he waited near the exit, unsure if she'd remember him. But when she walked by, their eyes met, and she smiled, warm and genuine. "No shadows this time," she said softly. He nodded. "No shadows," he replied. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by applause and flashing lights. Two souls who had burned each other once, now standing peacefully in the same glow. It wasn't love. It wasn't revenge. It was something rarer, closure. And as they walked away in opposite directions, the city seemed to whisper their story into the wind, a story of pain, rise, and redemption that time itself refused to forget. One rainy evening, she sat alone in her study, the city lights flickering like fading stars beyond the glass. The sound of the rain reminded her of the night it all began, when he mocked her dreams, when everything felt impossible. On her desk lay an old, yellowed letter, one she'd written years ago but never sent. It was meant for him. She unfolded it slowly, the ink blurred slightly with age. "You tried to break me," it read, "but you only taught me how to rebuild stronger." She smiled faintly. The girl who wrote that letter was gone now, replaced by a woman who no longer needed to prove herself. The anger that once burned inside her had become something softer, like warmth after winter. She folded the letter back and placed it inside a drawer. It didn't need to be sent. The story had already found its ending. Later that night, she walked onto her balcony. The rain had stopped, and the world smelled clean new. The streets shimmered under the glow of streetlights, long shadows stretching and blending into the distance. She watched them quietly and thought about how strange life could be. Once, she lived in his shadow, unseen, underestimated, forgotten. But in chasing the light, she had created her own, a shadow so strong that even he now stood beneath it. And in that thought came a revelation. It was never about revenge. It was about becoming everything they said she couldn't. Her greatest victory wasn't that he had fallen, but that she had risen without losing her soul. A soft breeze touched her face, carrying the scent of rain and memory. She whispered to the night, "You don't have to destroy your enemies sometimes, you just outgrow them." The next morning, sunlight spilled across her room. Her phone buzzed, a message from an old colleague. "He's retiring." Said he's moving to the countryside. Peaceful place. She smiled. It was the right ending for both of them. As she got ready for the day, she paused by her mirror. There she was, older, stronger, wiser, the reflection of every storm she had survived. She whispered to herself, half a smile, half a sigh. "He mocked my dreams once, but now, he lives in the shade of what I became." And for the first time, she felt no bitterness, no triumph, just peace. Because in the quiet truth of that moment, she finally understood. Her revenge was never about him. It was about becoming untouchable. In the end, I never needed to prove him wrong. He proved himself wrong by never believing he could fall. And I just kept walking. Through the noise, through the doubt, through the nights that never ended. They say revenge is sweet, but I've learned something else. True revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's quiet. It's standing in the light, while your shadow tells the story for you. He mocked my dreams once. Now, he lives in their shadow, a reminder that every insult can become a seed. And when that seed grows, it doesn't need applause, just peace.